Seconds after liftoff, a Cessna 172 in Florida pitched up steeply, rolled left, and smashed into the ground, killing the instructor and one passenger instantly. The crazy part? The engine was running, the airplane was healthy, and the weather was fine. So, what went wrong? Well, investigators found it wasn't a system failure at all. It was a human mistake, and honestly, one of the simplest but deadliest ones you can make. So let's talk about who was on board and why they were even in the air that day. The instructor was Felipe Becerra Cardenas, 31 years old, a commercial pilot and flight instructor from Mexico with about 900 hours total time. He had just done his flight review a week earlier, so he was current and legal to fly. Sitting in the front left seat was Shelby Thomas, just 23 years old, from Port Wentworth, Georgia. In the back was Jamal Hall, also 23, from Georgia. He's the only one who survived. Neither Shelby nor Jamal were pilots. They weren't students either. This wasn't a check ride, it wasn't training. It was what flight schools like to call a discovery flight. Basically, an introductory ride where a non-pilot gets to experience flying in a small plane for the first time. Now here's where it gets interesting. Discovery flights are marketed as lessons, so they technically fall under Part 91 instruction, but in reality, they look and feel a whole lot like air tours, sightseeing flights that are heavily regulated. Air tours need FAA letters of authorization, Part 136, safety procedures, even drug and alcohol testing programs. But call it a lesson, and suddenly you don't need all that. So we've got a gray area here. These two young passengers thought they were just taking a fun flight over Miami, but legally it was logged as instruction. And that regulatory loophole is worth keeping in mind as we dig into what happened next. The flight departed from North Perry Airport in Pembroke Pines, a really busy training hub with short 3,200-foot runways, and this airport has a history. Residents have been pushing for safety audits because there have been multiple accidents in recent years, so it's a high-pressure environment, lots of training flights, short strips, and not much room for error. Now the takeoff itself looked completely normal at first. Surveillance cameras caught it. Smooth ground roll, rotation, liftoff, textbook stuff. But almost immediately after leaving the runway, the nose pitched way up. The airplane climbed, but only for a few seconds, reaching maybe 125 feet off the ground. Then the left wing suddenly dropped, the bank steepened, and the plane slammed into the airport property just 650 feet past the runway's end. Here's the crazy part. The engine was making power all the way down. The propeller showed it, the wreckage confirmed it. There was no fire, no explosion. The airplane didn't quit on them. It was flying just fine until it wasn't. And that right there tells us this was not a mechanical failure. This was a control issue. The airplane was pulled into a corner of its flight envelope that it simply could not survive at such a low altitude. And that's where we pivot, because the real question isn't what happened, but why. Why would a flight instructor, of all people, allow a simple takeoff to turn into a death trap within seconds? When the NTSB engineers studied the video, they calculated something chilling. The Cessna's wing angle of attack, the angle between the wing and the oncoming air, hit around 14.5 degrees. For this airplane, that's over the critical stall limit, and once you pass that line, the wing simply stops producing lift. Let's match that up with the numbers. A 172P rotates around 55 knots, climbs best over obstacles at 60 knots, and climbs most efficiently at about 76 knots. The ADS-B data showed this flight reached about 75 knots briefly, but then it decayed down into the low 60s, right as the wing hit its stall. That's a perfect storm. High pitch, falling speed, and critical angle exceeded. Now here's the catch. At only 125 feet above the ground, there is no recovery option. At altitude, you can unload the wing, pitch down, regain airflow, and recover in a few hundred feet. But right after takeoff, there isn't even time for the stall horn to finish blaring before you're out of altitude. That's why stall accidents immediately after liftoff are so unforgiving. You don't get a warning shot, you just hit the ground. And this is the scary part. The airplane itself was fine. The engine was running strong. The controls were intact. Everything was working. Until physics took over. That's what makes this so frustrating. It wasn't bad luck, it was simply flying the wing outside its limits at the worst possible moment. So, how does a professional instructor, someone trained to teach safety, let that happen? Let's dig deeper. First, the right seat factor. Instructors fly from the right side, and that's not just a mirror image of the left. The sight picture is skewed, the controls don't feel as natural, and judging pitch can be trickier. Even experienced CFIs admit that right seat flying can make rotations sloppier, maybe pulling a bit more than they intended. That little extra pull can be the difference between a clean climb and a dangerous stall angle. Then there's passenger psychology. A discovery flight is basically a sales pitch. It's supposed to be fun, thrilling, make the passengers walk away saying, "Wow, I want to learn to fly." And that creates subtle pressure on instructors. Some might try to spice up the takeoff, pitch it up steep, make it feel like a roller coaster. But here's the problem. The airplane doesn't care about impressing anyone. It only cares about air speed and angle of attack. The FAA has been hammering this in its instructor guidance for years. Before a discovery flight, you brief, "I have the controls for takeoff and climb." You set clear pitch and airspeed gates. You make sure excitement never trumps safety. If that discipline slips, and clearly it did here, the risks multiply fast. And then we've got the regulatory gray zone. This wasn't a training flight in the sense of a student learning maneuvers. It was basically a sightseeing hop. But because the operator logs it as instruction, they don't have to comply with the stricter FAA rules for air tours. Things like Part 136 safety programs, letters of authorization, and mandatory drug and alcohol testing. So here's the hard question. Are some schools blurring that line to avoid oversight? And if so, are we leaving passengers more vulnerable than they realize? Now, zooming out, this crash doesn't stand alone. North Perry Airport is one of the busiest GA training airports in the country. It has 4 short, 3,200-foot runways, constant traffic, and a history of local accidents that's led residents to demand safety reviews. In that kind of environment, a lapse in technique can turn catastrophic in seconds. And this crash is a textbook case of the bigger GA problem. Loss of control in flight. Year after year, it's the leading cause of fatal accidents. Not weather, not mechanical failures, plain old stalls and spins, and the most lethal stalls, they happen right after takeoff, when there's no margin for recovery. So what do we learn from this? 3 big takeaways. First, stick to safe rotation and climb speeds. Don't yank it off early, don't chase a steep pitch, no matter who's watching. Second, respect stall, margins. At altitude, a stall is a scare. Right after takeoff, it's a death sentence. And third, instructors especially need to keep discovery flights about safety, not thrills. Your job isn't to impress, it's to make sure the passengers walk away alive and wanting to fly again. So at the end of the day, this wasn't a mysterious failure or some hidden gremlin in the airplane. It was one simple human mistake, pulling too hard, too soon, and it cost 2 people their lives. But it leaves us with a bigger question. Should discovery flights be regulated like commercial air tours, with stricter oversight, or is this just a brutal reminder of how unforgiving aviation is when you step outside the safe envelope? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I really want to hear what you think. And if you're into these kinds of deep dive crash breakdowns, hit that subscribe button, because these lessons, they're the ones that save lives.